A 24-year-old woman walked into a house that night believing she was finally about to reclaim her freedom. She never came back out. What happened inside that home was so disturbing that even experienced investigators struggled to process it. A missing woman, a boyfriend who seemed almost too calm, a family desperately searching for answers, and a house hiding secrets no one could imagine. But the most disturbing part of this entire story is that someone may have known the truth from the very beginning. Before talking about the crime itself, you need to understand who she was. She was the kind of person people naturally gravitated toward: warm, outgoing, close to her family, and deeply loved by the people around her. Friends described her as someone who could light up an entire room just by walking into it. But over time, the people closest to her began noticing changes. The relationship she was trapped in had slowly started wearing her down. There was tension in her voice, fear behind her eyes. Something wasn't right, and eventually she made a decision that takes an enormous amount of courage. She was going to end the relationship for good. That night, she drove to her boyfriend's house believing it would be one final conversation, one final goodbye. It was the last confirmed moment she was ever seen alive. Hours after she disappeared, a security camera in a quiet neighborhood captured something that at the time seemed ordinary. A car slowly pulled over near the curb. Moments later, someone stepped out from the driver's side wearing dark clothing and covering their face. The figure walked away quickly, disappearing into the night without looking back. That car belonged to her, but the person seen leaving it behind wasn't her. Her family had already spent hours trying to reach her. Calls went unanswered, text messages stopped delivering, and for the people who knew her best, that silence was terrifying. Because she wasn't the type of person to disappear without saying anything. Something had happened, and deep down, they already feared the worst. When investigators first spoke to her boyfriend, he appeared calm, almost unnervingly calm. He explained that she had come over that evening, spent a few hours with him, and eventually left on her own. According to him, nothing unusual had happened. He even claimed he was worried too, that he had been trying to call her. On the surface, he sounded cooperative, but experienced detectives notice things other people don't. Because when someone you supposedly love suddenly vanishes, most people panic. Their emotions spill out naturally: fear, confusion, desperation. He showed almost none of it. While her family was living through one of the worst nights of their lives, he answered questions with the composure of someone who already knew how the story ended. And the more investigators listened to him, the more something felt wrong. The deeper investigators looked into the case, the more his version of events began to fall apart. Security footage helped reconstruct the route taken by her vehicle after leaving the house, and almost immediately, detectives noticed something strange. The car wasn't heading toward any place she would normally go. The route made no sense. Then came the most important detail of all. The person captured abandoning the vehicle had a much larger build than hers, and broader shoulders, taller frame, different posture. Whoever drove that car that night, it wasn't her. At that point, investigators started considering a terrifying possibility. Someone had taken control of the scene after she disappeared. Someone had tried to distance the vehicle from the house before anyone realized she was missing, and all roads were beginning to lead back to the same place. With mounting evidence against him, investigators finally obtained a warrant to search the house. The moment officers stepped inside, several of them noticed it immediately. The smell, a heavy, unmistakable odor lingered in the air. The kind of smell homicide detectives never forget. As they moved through the home, the tension inside the house became suffocating. Search dogs repeatedly reacted near the bedroom and the attic area, refusing to let investigators ignore those locations. Then came the discoveries: small traces of blood, cleaning products scattered throughout the house, signs that someone had desperately tried to erase evidence. Everything about the scene suggested violence had taken place there. But there was one major problem. She was nowhere to be found. No body, no confession, no definitive proof of murder. Just a house filled with disturbing signs that something horrific had happened behind closed doors. As investigators closed in on him, another person slowly moved to the center of the case. his mother. Publicly, she defended her son at every opportunity. She insisted he could never do something like this. She spoke calmly, almost protectively, even as investigators intensified their search. But behind the scenes, detectives were beginning to suspect something far more disturbing. Phone records and surveillance data suggested she may have been communicating with him after the disappearance. His movements became harder to track. He seemed to stay one step ahead of investigators for weeks, and detectives started asking themselves a difficult question. Was she helping him hide? The possibility changed the entire tone of the investigation. This was no longer just about a missing woman and a fleeing suspect. Now, investigators feared that someone close to him may have been protecting him from the very beginning. And if that was true, then this crime was even darker than they first imagined. Suddenly, he vanished. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and during that time, investigators were no longer just searching for answers about her disappearance. Now they were hunting a fugitive. He moved constantly, staying in different locations and avoiding direct contact whenever possible. Somehow, every time authorities got close, he managed to stay ahead of them. For her family, the nightmare only became worse. Not only were they grieving someone they loved, but the man believed to be responsible was still out there, breathing freely, while they had no idea where she was or what had been done to her. Every passing day felt unbearable. Where was she? Was she still alive somewhere? Or had the truth been hidden so well that they would never find her at all? The family begged for answers publicly. They pushed investigators relentlessly, refused to let the case fade away. And behind the scenes, authorities kept building their case piece by piece, waiting for the moment they could finally corner him. After months of searching, investigators finally tracked him to an apartment complex in Washington. They arrived with a warrant for his arrest. This was supposed to be the moment the case finally changed, the moment investigators could bring him in alive, question him, and maybe, finally, learn what had happened to her. That's not what happened. As officers surrounded the apartment and ordered him to surrender, he emerged holding a knife. The confrontation lasted only seconds. Police opened fire. He died at the scene. And just like that, the only person who truly knew everything was gone forever. No confession, no explanation, no moment where he would have to sit across from her family and answer for what he had done. Whatever happened inside that house died with him, or at least most of it did. Months later, in a remote mountainous area, a local resident made a discovery that immediately triggered a call to 911. Human remains had been found scattered across the terrain. Investigators arrived at the scene knowing there was a strong possibility they were about to confirm everyone's worst fear. Forensic specialists worked carefully to identify the remains, and eventually, the answer came back. It was her. For the family, the confirmation was devastating, but in a painful way, it also ended months of uncertainty. As long as she had not been found, there was always a tiny part of them still holding on to hope. That hope disappeared the moment the forensic results arrived. Investigators concluded that she had been killed the same night she went to the house. Her body had later been dismembered and transported to the remote area where it remained hidden for months. Eventually, she was brought home, not alive. Not the way her family had prayed for, but finally, she was no longer missing. Investigators eventually pieced together what most people had already feared. She went to that house intending to end a toxic relationship. She never made it back out alive. He killed her, tried to cover his tracks, fled from authorities, and died before ever facing trial, before ever hearing a guilty verdict, before ever having to explain himself publicly. And in the end, no one else was convicted. The suspicions surrounding his mother never completely disappeared, but they also never led to criminal charges. For the family, that became another wound that never fully healed. Because knowing what happened is not the same as getting justice. There was no courtroom, no confession, no final moment where the system openly acknowledged the full horror of what had been done to her. Her family was left carrying those unanswered questions alone. And maybe that's the most disturbing part of this entire case. Not just the violence, not just the cover-up, but the terrifying reality that someone can take a life, destroy an entire family forever, and still leave behind silence where answers should have been. She walked into that house believing she was finally taking her life back. She believed the relationship was over. She believed she would go home afterward. She never got that chance. What happened to her became one of those cases that leaves behind more than grief. It leaves behind fear. Fear of how dangerous certain relationships can become once control starts slipping away. Fear of how quickly love can turn into obsession. And fear of how many warning signs are often ignored until it's too late. The people closest to her had noticed the tension, the emotional exhaustion, the fear she tried to hide. And now, looking back, those signs feel impossible to ignore. Her story is more than a crime case. It's a reminder that threats during a breakup should never be dismissed, that controlling behavior is never harmless, and that sometimes the most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship is the moment one person decides to leave. Today, her family continues fighting to keep her memory alive, and even though the person responsible will never stand trial, her name is still remembered. Rest in peace.